Welcome, everybody, to another rendition of The Lone Wolf Show, and you're watching www.witchcrafttv.online, and we have a special guest backstage, and her name is Karen Tate. Karen Tate, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to have you on. And I was reading over your bio, and I noticed that you are a prominent figure in, I believe you said like online radio in the early 2000s. And you were, definitely part of a movement and prestigious author as well from several books. Is this all, that's all true, right?
Um, well, I kind of think of it as, I was blazing a trail with my pink-handled machete. I was actually one of the first ones to, maybe with the exception of Carol Christ in Greece, but I was one of the first ones to actually do goddess tours around the world. Uh,
Nice.
I I have the longest running sacred feminine, goddess oriented podcast, Voices of the Sacred Feminine, goes back
Hmm.
to around, I think, 2009. Yeah, I've published 7 books. Give talks at places like the Parliament, the American Academy of Religion, Joseph Campbell roundtables, magical places, secular places. Yeah, I've been out there a while doing a lot of different things.
You said Parliament. So you're speaking of the Parliament of World Religions?
Yeah, yeah. The
Wow.
Council for the Parliament of World Religions. Yeah, I think when it was in Idaho, was it Idaho? Yeah, um, that was the Parliament I was at. I think it might have been 2015. It was when the focus was on women, and having women at the center of society, and it was pretty incredible because I think that was the first time women and non-traditional spiritualities really had a place at the table.
Hmm. Well, and who were some of the keynote speakers in that 2015 Parliament?
Oh, gee. Phyllis Karat, I
Nice.
believe. Um, Me.
Mhm.
um, Gee, it's so hard to remember. I don't really recall. Honestly, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. I know that the last Parliament of World Religions, the keynote speaker for the pagan community was Laura Gonzalez, and after we had her on here the show too, and it's very intriguing to reach out and have discussions with some of these leaders in paganism. So that's really cool that you were involved with Parliament of Religions. To me, that's really a big deal. And there's all kinds of like different factions and families and groups that represent the pagan community that go to those places. So
Yeah.
that's really cool.
Well, and
It's
also too, even at the American Academy of World Religions, which was in Los Angeles, I was one of the first pagan scholars that had a seat at the table there too, because they had not included goddess spirituality at the American Academy of Religion for a long time.
mhm.
And the first year they did, I was vetted, and I gave a talk on the politics of ecofeminist goddess spirituality, and then they invited me back again, and I talked about how I focused on the ISIS festival that they have every March, the Isa de Navigiem, or Festival of Isis, that people are recreating in the modern world, and how we're being called to reconstruct ancient spiritualities in a modern context.
Yes,
So the second time I talked at West Core, that was the topic of my talk.
I really like that. And you mentioned ISIS. Do, do you are you familiar with Olivia Robinson at all?
Oh
And
yeah, yeah, yeah,
is
yeah.
that somebody that you've met? Have you met her?
She ordained me at Clonical Castle.
That is very, very intriguing. I really like that idea. I simply adore her work. I've interviewed and met so many people that are a part of FOI, Fellowship of Isis, and that really, really makes me very, very happy. And yeah, so that's really, really cool.
Yeah,
I'm
she was on my radio show. I have a lot of the foremothers and way showers. It's not just women; it's men too. Like Isaac Bonowitz was on my show, for instance.
right.
But I did interview her, and her voice still lives on there.
Mhm.
I have a segment called "Gone but Not Forgotten," and she actually talked about the first time she appeared at the Parliament for World Religion. She had
Right.
death threats.
Yeah.
And Patrick McCullum, another friend of mine who was there at the Parliament, and
Very
I
cool.
think he still goes to those things. He talked about how, well, it would be 50 years ago now, I guess. I think he was back then the chaplain for pagans in prison. And if you talked about goddess out in the mainstream world, like him, somebody threatened to firebomb his house. So, we have come a long way, as I think the sacred feminine is being rebirthed into society.
Right. I definitely look up to Patrick McCullum. I've been out to his ranch in New Mexico and was just painting his kitchen cabinets a year ago. And yeah, so yeah, and I love his work with prison ministry in California that kind of echoed out through the country, and that's really cool. So yeah, that's really, really intriguing. And and there's just so many different people that are involved in this. And I want to say the witchcraft revival. I want to say, because I think people that are involved in the witchcraft revival are kind of, well, goddess spirituality focused, anyways, because you know it's a matriarch spirituality to begin with. So it really must have been a lot harder for maybe male leaders in the early days than it is now. Do you think it's the same, or is it different? Is it more difficult? I mean, has the message gotten across? We're in 2025, and you've obviously been around for a long time. I wasn't like involved in the community when Olivia came to America and stuff, and you have. I mean, what has been? Has it all paid off? Is it working? Is it?
You know, um, that's I'll answer that question as best I can. I think things ebb and flow. Um, in the fellowship of, well, okay, let me start out by saying that I learned about goddess from Dianic women, you know.
Mhm.
However, I and I appreciate that. I will forever owe those women a debt of gratitude. But I am not a female supremacist.
Okay.
I've been married to an incredible man for over 40 years. I feel like he's been the wind beneath my wings that has supported all my work. He's been on my tours with me, making sure we didn't lose anybody. He would cook dinner when I was up against a book deadline. He would come to everything I did. I mean, he's an Anubis guy, so
Mhm.
he was really into this, and so he was always there at my side no matter what I was doing or where I was going. And that kind of was a friction for me in the Dianic community, because some of them um, would prefer to see women elevated over men. But I don't believe in that, because I feel like that's just reverse discrimination. And I know too many good men that don't deserve that. Every man isn't a misogynist. So I started out in the Dianic community, but then, I mean, the Fellowship of Isis is not a woman's group. It's, for everyone all over. So within the Fellowship of Isis, I feel like there was an easy alliance between male and female leaders. Yeah, you could more easily become a leader in goddess spirituality if you were a woman, but I don't know that. I mean, it wasn't my sense that the men had it bad, that they were somehow being forced to take a back seat. And in the pagan community in Los Angeles, where I spent most of my time, I didn't get the sense that men were subservient or took a second class role. It just felt like it was egalitarian, the way we would hope the world would be, where we're just equal partners in this. Because I think if we are equal partners, then we can, see the world through both our eyes instead of a skewed female only or male only perspective.
Can you tell me and our viewers what egalitarian means?
Oh, egalitarian, it's like equality. We believe, and I guess we'll probably get into who some of my mentors were, but, we believe that in ancient times, it wasn't always this male dominated patriarchy. There were egalitarian societies where men and women were equal. Women didn't have to take a back seat and just be a leader in the home or be subservient to her husband. Right. She could lead in public. She, wasn't reduced to being a breeder. Her biology did not define her role and purpose in life. She could be anything a man could be. So there was this equality across society. And, and that's and some people now call it equalitarian rather than egalitarian. But, saying equalitarian maybe makes it a little clearer.
Mm-hmm. So it's like the middle ground. It's the mercury of the patriarch and the matriarch is kind of finding a balance to it.
Well, I think if we think about it as a pendulum, I think in the earliest days, the artifacts show us that humanity probably had a female god before there was ever a male god. And then it swung back in the other direction, and we have patriarchy, where everything that was female, whether it was women, whether it was deity, whether it was nature, that became secondary and demonized. And I think we have to swing back to the middle, to a balance point where neither is superior and they both coexist in equality and love and harmony, recognizing the value that each brings to the table, no longer marginalizing the values of the sacred feminine, because that's what has our world so screwed up.
So I recently found out something that I thought was very, very fascinating, and I'd love to get your point of view on it. And it's kind of it may or may not be controversial, and well, I don't care because I'm trying to learn and put things together. As far as when a human being is in the womb, right? I've recently found out in that every human on the planet was born, well, in the womb anyways, was a female at first.
Yeah.
That's true. And so to me, that means that, all of this misogynist, crap or whatever, it's just you were a female before you were a male. So from a street perspective, why are you tripping? So does that make sense?
Well, the problem is most people don't know that, right? Okay. So, recently, one of the executive orders out of the White House was everybody now has to adhere to the gender or the gender or sex that they were at the time. I think they said at the time of conception or birth or something. It must have been the time of conception, because the way they worded it, I might have this a little off, but it was floating out there in the community exactly what you said. Well, they don't understand that we all started out as female, and then the chromosomes changed in weeks later, and if you were going to become a male, your chromosomes changed so that you were a male. So I think like so many things, we all aren't privy to the same education. We all don't research the same stuff. I grew up in the South. Okay, it wasn't until I was 30 and left Louisiana and moved to California that I feel like I really started to get an education. Before that, I lived in my racist Catholic bubble. I thought people like Rush Limbaugh were gods. And I thought Fox News was, the bomb. And I didn't know any better because nobody ever countered that. We didn't hear anything outside of that echo chamber to challenge in the least. And then I get away from that and I start to educate myself. My eyes are opened. I start to learn about goddess spirituality and patriarchy and misogyny and egalitarian societies and ancient cultures. And it changed my entire life because I felt like I had been duped for the first 30 years of my life, quite frankly. You learn about the Gnostic Gospels, you learn about, all the hidden stuff that may help you develop your consciousness and expand your intellectual, capacity. You have intellectual curiosity, but everybody doesn't, and everybody doesn't go down those rabbit holes to learn about this stuff. Minoan culture, that was probably one of the first great egalitarian societies, but you don't know that until you start going down the rabbit hole. So yeah, I mean, it would be great if we had an educational system where everyone was on the same page. And in a way, that's why I'm really afraid of homeschooling, because we already have gatekeepers deciding what we're going to learn. If we have parents maybe who don't want us to know about things because they're of the devil or they don't know about it themselves, then it really does limit, our awareness, our education. So, I mean, that's not to say some people might not get a great homeschooled education, but I don't know. I mean, I think it would be awfully hard for a parent to take care of kids, run a house, and give the kids the kind of well-rounded, in-depth education that we need in the world today. So I don't know. That's just my perspective at this point. I'm willing to be convinced otherwise.
So something comes to mind where I have read a few times in different places that the winners of history get to write it.
Yeah, the phrase is history is written by the conquerors. Right. And the last book I wrote was called Normalizing Abuse, and I talk about the abuse in academia. And I know a wonderful scholar who's gay, and for a long time he worked for a Christian college that saw gay people as an abomination. His work went nowhere. He was lucky he had a job. He's an expert on the Eleusinian mysteries. And, I believe he probably has figured out what was going on during the Eleusinian mysteries. And it wasn't until he got out of that college and was in one that didn't have anti-gay bias and they allowed him to put his work out there in the world. And now he's famous. But that's just a perspective. Or you have people that if you're, racist scholars don't want to give brown-skinned or black-skinned people credit for having built, the pyramids in Nubia. They say, oh, they can't possibly have accomplished that, because of our perspective, how we devalue people of color. So then it gets written into the history books with that bias, or I know in the South, our history books were controlled by some organization in Texas. They didn't want to put stuff in the history books about the contributions of Black people, of Thomas Jefferson, because it went against their narrative. Mm-hmm. So it's dangerous, I think, for us not to all have the same foundation educational foundation, because we can, we'll grow up with these horrible bigotries and biases.
Mhm. And when you say narrative, I see that a lot of times I feel like particular people will create a narrative, and I've also found that the narrative becomes the people's truth, and I feel like maybe truth becomes subjective. And is truth subjective? And like, how do we know what is the truth if truth is subjective?
Well, I don't necessarily. I mean, I think truth is truth and facts are facts, right? I don't. I don't. I think we have to be careful not to confuse opinion with truth. I mean, some things are just true, like what you said before. All of the babies start in the womb as female. That's a
Yep.
truth.
Right.
Now, there may be people who won't want to believe that, and they'll create a different narrative. You know,
That's science.
yeah,
That's
but
science.
there's a lot of people who deny science. I mean, for
Right.
instance, people who want to believe the Earth is 6,000 years old. They say carbon dating is a hoax. You know, so people will always create a narrative. I think, unfortunately, if they haven't come up with critical thinking skills and being able to challenge ideas, I think they're the sheeple. They kind of just go along with whatever is told to them, especially if it maybe enables them to retain their biases. you know I mean, like the DEI stuff that's coming out of the White House right now, that's normalizing discrimination against women, people of color, disabled people. And what did they say? Trump himself said, oh, the wildfires would have been able to be overcome if you didn't have female firefighters. There wouldn't be such violence in the street if they didn't hire Black and women on the police force. And there was a third one. Oh, the FAA. The plane crash was because they hired women and people of color. That is the beginning of the normalizing of discrimination, so that, and it's a shame to say this, but it's to enable white men to continue to have the privilege that they used to have. I mean, I worked for a man who would not allow me to interview Black people for jobs. He also didn't want women in particular jobs. And it wasn't based on, well, they needed to be, super strong or something like that. And, most women might not have the upper body strength. It wasn't anything like that. It was just bias, you know? So I forgot now what the original question was. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. So you've also published numerous books. Like I think there's a total of 7, or is it 9?
Seven right now.
So 7 books. Can you tell me about your first book and how they've changed throughout, like, the books? Like, how did has
Yeah.
your has
Yeah.
your ideology changed since you've been writing books? Because writing books takes a lot of research and a lot of study.
Yeah. Well, I mentioned earlier that I was probably one of the first people to really do goddess tours. And my first book was Sacred Places of Goddess, 108 Destinations. And, it's I had I traveled to probably 80% of the places in that book with my husband. And then later we started doing the goddess tours. And in that book, I came up with these, kind of thought leader ideas, I guess. For instance, I coined the term goddess advocate because I felt like I needed a label for myself, and I wasn't sure a lot of the labels out there fit. So I came up with the term goddess advocate, and I introduced it in that book. And I also suggested that museums that house goddess artifacts be considered sacred sites, especially, here in the United States, where unless we travel and have a passport, we don't have the advantage to go visit these ancient sites and ancient archaeological sites or sacred groves and things like that, to actually stand in these places where goddess was worshipped in the center of society. But if we go to a museum, say for instance in New York, or the Rosicrucian Museum in San Jose, California, we can at least go to these sacred sites where, goddesses, her artifacts are there, which means her history is there, her image is there. And we, to me, the museum now becomes a sacred site. Just like the Statue of Liberty is, I believe she is like the political goddess. And you have the Sekhmet Temple outside Las Vegas. That's a sacred site. So anyway, that was the first book I wrote, Sacred Places Around the World, started doing sacred tours. The next book that got published was called Walking an Ancient Path. And in there, I write about how it's a little bit autobiographical, but it's about how a person or a community can incorporate goddess spirituality into their life or their community. It's a good beginner book, I think, but there's also a lot in there. Ordination ceremonies, the politics of spirituality, things like that go beyond kind of a newbie. In the Earth section, I talk about things we did on sacred tours and magical experiences and stuff like that. The next book was Goddess Calling, Inspirational Messages and Meditations. And that came about because I was invited to do basically a Sunday service every month at a local pagan store that had a space where people could meet and do classes and stuff. And I had to write sacred messages and meditations for these sacred Sundays. So I took all of that and incorporated it into a book, so that if someone had a small group or just for themselves, they had the format for the ritual and they could plug in the sacred message with a meditation, and they could, they had a ready-made ritual, and it loosely followed the wheel of the year. So then, and I'm still doing my podcast during this time, and Riane Eisler is one of my mentors. And she wrote the famous book, The Chalice and the Blade. And by now I'm really starting to think about goddess, not just as a deity who resides in the heavens, but I'm thinking about goddess as an archetype, a role model for women and men. And I'm also realizing her values and ideals encourage us to be social justice warriors. And I'm starting to see how important it is that we stand up for the values and ideals of the sacred feminine. So my work did start to pivot as I got more involved with Riane Eisler. While some people might have gone in the Starhawk direction, because she was always out there protesting in the street, Riane Eisler was writing these books about partnership over domination and sacred pleasure, so we wouldn't, continue to fall victims to this shame of our bodies and sacred pleasure, So yeah, my work did pivot from, just being someone who looked at herstory and the sacred feminine as something in the distant past to something that's relevant to us today, to live more whole, fulfilled lives, and with a motivation to change society so that it's more equal and just, and we take care of the earth, and we don't discriminate against women or people of color or trans people or disabled people. We're all of equal value, and we're kind of, oneness is a term a lot of people are using now. Ascension is another term I'm hearing a lot now. I think to a certain extent, the sacred feminine, actually, her values help us ascend. Her values are high frequency values. I think the world would be a better place with those values restored to the center, rather than being marginalized in a patriarchal, male-dominated world.
So we're going to talk more with Karen Tate about her books and where to find them right after this commercial.
Do y'all know about Witchcraft TV online? I've been watching that the last couple days. Constantly going, I'm learning interesting stuff. And it turns out, apparently, I have a show there at midnight every night at Witchcraft TV.online. Witchcraft TV.online. Check that out. I'm going to tune in at midnight and see what it is I'm doing there.
Merry meet and welcome to Festival Fun on Witchcraft TV, where we talk about paganism, witchcraft, spiritual festivals, conventions, and other gatherings. These events are a wonderful way to learn about magical practices, to participate in rituals, and meet like-minded people. It's a whole lot of fun. With your host, A.C. Fisher and Harold Sanford Carter III. Welcome to Festival Fun.
So welcome back. This is the Lone Wolf Show on www.witchcrafttv.online. We have Karen Tate with us, who was ordained by Olivia Robinson from the Fellowship of Isis. I mean, that in itself is like so magical, and I all I can do is study the history of what is the contemporary revival of witchcraft and earth-based spirituality, and spirituality with the feminine divine, and I'm just like very, very impressed. Like I really like Olivia and her story and what she left behind with their videos and information, and I've interviewed some of people that were also like a part of her movement when it happened, and so yeah, that's really, really cool. I did read your bio, but I just wasn't like, I didn't know that, so I'm glad that we had this. I'm glad that we had this interview, and you were talking about your books and the people that you were influenced by, and you mentioned Starhawk. And I remember the book very well, The Spiral Dance, I think it was. And it was a very, very thick book. Now, was that the type of literature that was, and people and icons, when you were walking your path in the earlier days, was that like your inspiration, or what other inspirational pagan icons and leaders? What was your inspiration in the early days?
Yeah, those were the people that were in my peer group. They were in my orbit, and it's really a shame how we keep reinventing the wheel. I think about all the people whose shoulders my generation stood on to be able to. I don't mean that in an oppressive way, but we add to their work, or what they have managed to put out into the world, we take that and we continue it. If it hadn't been for people like Olivia Robertson, Mary Daly, Selena Fox. If it hadn't been for people like that, the rest of us wouldn't be doing their work. And now a lot of the young pagans who are up and coming, they don't know me and I don't know them. There's a disconnect in the continuity. And I wish there were a way for us to fix that. But who were the people in my orbit? Yeah, Starhawk. I remember when Starhawk came to Los Angeles, it was my job to take her everywhere for the 3 days she was in Los Angeles. So yeah, I knew Starhawk, conversed with Starhawk. Lady Olivia, like we already said, she would come to Los Angeles. And, she went up to Isis Oasis, which is north of San Francisco. And, she would do convocations there and ordain people there. So, she did make it to the United States, and she went to other places as well. So probably quite a few people still alive today were in Lady Olivia's orbit. Starhawk, I think, inspired me to be political. She made me realize that we had to stand up and speak out. So from that standpoint, Starhawk was influential to me. But usually when people say, well, who are your mentors? I usually mention Rianne Eisler and Marilyn Stone, because Marilyn Stone wrote When God Was a Woman. And Rianne Eisler wrote her most famous book, The Chalice and the Blade. I think it's been translated into 40 languages. She goes back to the beginning and explains how prevalent goddess was in the most ancient times, so that we know this isn't a feminist fantasy. These artifacts weren't ancient Barbie dolls. This was the real deal. And she really sort of gives an in-depth history of the sacred feminine, going back, 12,000 years. And a lot of the foremothers of my generation did that. Monica Shu, who wrote the Great Cosmic Mother. I don't think those kinds of books are getting written right now. I could be wrong. It might just be my shelves are full of those, so I'm not looking for more of the same. So I would say, those two in particular were my nonfiction, mentors. But my fiction mentor, I know she's controversial these days, but I don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Marion Zimmer Bradley's book, The Myths of Avalon, that was an incredible book that really made me start to think about being a priestess. And really, my spirituality, I can't separate being a priestess of Isis and Sekhmet from being a feminist. The two go hand in hand, because I really do believe, sacred feminine liberation theology, that's the scholarly name for this, is about not allowing women to be marginalized so that they achieve equality. We don't even have an equal rights amendment in this country. Women in the United States got the vote after women in Turkey, which was an Islamic country, and anyway, we don't, I think because of the influence of fundamentalist Christianity in this country, so many women just, they're docile in their acceptance of subjugation and second-class citizenship, so to speak. So to me, it's important that we have equality in the world.
I like the idea of equality, of being fair. Fairly. Yeah, I like the idea of being fair. Absolutely. You said a word that's kind of new to me. It may or may not be newer to the viewers. And I've come across it a few different times, and I'm always trying to learn new things and draw better ideas and kind of trying to reach my highest good and everything. Can you explain to me and also our viewers who don't know, and some may know, what does it mean to be marginalized? What does that mean exactly?
To be made second class, to be made less than, to be devalued.
Okay.
And because in a lot of cultures, especially patriarchal, male-dominated cultures, women are told that their role in society is to have babies and take care of the family and obey their husband, and I don't think that was, Christianity has been bastardized, I believe. Jesus, walked with women. Jesus was not someone who discriminated against women. This is a totally male construct for power and control.
Right.
And so, yeah. And I feel like, we always hear love is the answer. And I know sometimes that's hard to swallow, especially if someone is trying to discriminate against you or devalue you or tell you, well, you should make less money because of your color or your gender or your disability. It's really hard to love people who are devaluing you unjustly. If you can't run a race because you're in a wheelchair, well, that's one thing. But if you're a great coder, for instance, you should be able to make as much money whether you're a woman or you're Black or you're in a wheelchair. In this movement now to just give white men the edge, really, I think is suggestive that, some white men don't want to compete. I know that might be a controversial thing to say, but I'm a direct person. And I think there's that, some people want white male privilege to remain the law of the land.
So we're almost at the top of the hour. We're almost out of time. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, Miss Karen Tate, and I want to ask you, what would be your advice to younger, up and coming, people that are fascinated by witchcraft, or they may have ambitions to be a priest, to be a priestess? What is your advice to them as they walk their path?
Well, I think, number one, you have to be responsible for your own education. You have to, I guess, by virtue of the fact that you're interested in this, you're already an independent thinker. So, don't be afraid to continue to use critical thinking and stick by your principles, use your voice. Stand up for injustice. I think if you want to be a priest or a priestess, you have to ask yourself, well, how am I going to be in service? Because I think that's something that often gets overlooked. How am I going to be in service to my community? And I think, never allow yourself to be to become a sheeple, challenge things that in your heart are wrong, because we usually do really know, and we just have to listen to that voice.
And I assume that all of the publications that you've been published with are all on Amazon Books. Is that correct?
Yeah, some of them are self-published. The last one was called Normalizing Abuse. And I talk about how so many things and so many aspects of our lives, we have just allowed the normalization of abuse. And we say, oh, that's just the way it is. It's always been that way. But I feel like if we start looking at it in the perspective that it's abuse and exploitation, maybe we wouldn't be so quick to accept it. Maybe we would start thinking about alternatives or exit strategies. So because of so much abuse, exploitation, marginalization, so many of us have trauma. And if we don't heal that trauma, it affects our outlook in our life and the decisions we make. So we have to be willing to look at that, at least, all the books can be found on Amazon. My website is my name, KarenTate.net. My podcast is out there, Voices of the Sacred Feminine. There's over 600 shows. I have a YouTube channel. So there's lots of content out there.
I definitely appreciate your service to earth-based spirituality. Thank you so much for coming on the Lone Wolf Show. And to our viewers, make sure you keep it right here on www.witchcrafttv.online. And be sure to check out Joanne with Mind, Body, and Soul on Monday night right here on social media. Bye for now, and blessed be, everyone.
Blessed be.
Do you feel something huge on the horizon?
Oh, absolutely. We're in for very big changes with the changes of the nodes and as a collective. We've been talking about this a lot in the ISFM in our morning group, that we need to make room for what's coming in, because what's coming in is not what we're used to. And we have to be open to that change. And what is it with most people? We resist change, because it's fear. We'd rather stick with what we know, even if it's toxic sometimes, because we know how to navigate that. Toxic is familiar, and as sick as that sounds, we tend to do that a lot of times as people. It's like, because people are like, why do people always go back to their ex? Or why do they stay in that bad relationship? Because, again, with these weird word analogies, the devil you know is better than the devil you know. And